I used to make 40K a year as a nurse, and now I make six figures as a freelance DevOps engineer. I changed my careers in my 30s without a CS degree, and now I've deployed over 100 Kubernetes clusters to production and built a community of exceptional engineers. Together, we're helping thousands of people transform their careers, with many members landing six-figure roles using the roadmap I'm about to share with you. I'll show you exactly which technologies to master today, backed by real hiring managers and CTOs who are looking for DevOps engineers right now. We're going to start with the most important thing to do as a DevOps engineer, which is to set up a home lab today. And you shouldn't just take my word for it. I recently did a tweet about home labbing. I shared a video about my Kubernetes home lab. And here I claimed that CTOs will rather hire the guy who has a Kubernetes cluster running in his basement than someone who has tons of certifications. Want to stand out? Learn why running a Kubernetes home lab is your secret weapon, etc. This tweet got almost 800 likes, 1,000 bookmarks, and nearly 60,000 views. And then Michael Cade here, who is a global field CTO and lead technologist at Veeam, he stated he completely agrees with this. Some people love exams, but I think the practical approach will beat exams every day of the week. It's not just me saying this. This is actually hiring CTOs who are confirming this. So you need to start a home lab today. Now, what is a home lab? When you think of home lab, you might think of these YouTubers like Techno Tim who have these awesome setups, and you might think you need all of this stuff with all of the fancy neon lighting. No, you don't need that stuff. A home lab is simply a place where you have some software running that you can experiment with safely in the comfort of your own environment. Let me show you my home lab. This is my home lab. This was my first home lab when I started out. It's a ThinkPad T420 with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a CPU, and I installed Linux on it, and that's where it all started for me. So you don't need all of this stuff. This is a home lab. I'm telling you, this is a home lab. In the next section, I'm going to recommend that you need to learn Linux, and you need to have a place where you can start firing off these commands. And this is a home lab. A home lab is nothing more than a place where you can experiment. So you can start with older hardware, and I'm currently running 5 of these. These are refurbished thin clients for $100 a piece, and I cluster these up in a Kubernetes cluster. That is my home lab for really cheap. So that is a home lab, a place where you can experiment. And I'm emphasizing this because I made the mistake of waiting too long with this. I was reading book after book on Linux. I was reading all of the theory, but I wasn't putting it into practice. And that's what you need to do. You need to put your learning into practice. This is really important that you start practicing, that you get the practical knowledge. And for that, you need a safe place to experiment. And that is just an old laptop. It can be a virtual machine that you hire at Hetzner for $10 a month. Just have a Linux command line somewhere, and that's all you need to get started. The great thing about having a home lab is that you can document everything online. So in one of the next sections in the DevOps roadmap that I'm about to share with you is about personal branding and online presence, which is going to help you find your first job. And if you just simply write about what you do in your home lab, then this is going to make you stand out from other candidates. And I'm going to go deeper into this later in the video, so make sure you watch until the end. And finally, it's an entry point to the self-hosting hobby. It's really fun to just have your own services running accessible over the internet, and it's actually quite addictive. So be careful, but it's a really fun hobby to get into, which is greatly going to improve your career. So a few more confirmations of this. Here's Ron Aerts. He says he's been a CTO and CEO myself, and he said he would hire that guy on the spot. And this was the same tweet that I did here. So he's telling me he would hire me on the spot just because I have a Kubernetes home lab and I'm able to talk about that eloquently. Next, we have Jeremy here. He also responded to this tweet. And he mentions that when he had his interview at Microsoft, he did get asked about it, and he doesn't have any certifications. So in short, creating a home lab is the most important thing that you need to do. That's the first part of the roadmap here. So what do we do with a home lab? You have your home lab running, but what do we do with it? Well, it's an entry point to the self-hosting hobby, but most importantly, it's important to start learning Linux, which is the second part of the roadmap here. As a DevOps engineer, you need to learn Linux. And I did another tweet about this where I wrote that I've interviewed DevOps candidates, and the ones who deeply understand Linux always rise to the top. And this tweet got almost 400 likes, lots of engagement as well. And someone responded to his tweet, Nick Piper here. He said, I've interviewed over 50 candidates for DevOps roles, and candidates with good and fast Linux command line and debugging skills almost always make it to the next round. It's such a no-brainer foundational skill that failing this is enough reason to disqualify someone. If you don't know Linux, you're likely to be disqualified from the rounds. Learn Linux, my friends. Learn it. So here's a list of things that I suggest you dive into. You should know about the boot process, what happens when you turn on the machine, the BIOS, the bootloader, etc. You need to know about file systems, ext4, ZFS, etc. Almost all problems in Linux are related to permissions, and especially with containers later. So you need to know that, well, systemd, any Linux distribution that's used in production these days is running systemd. So don't bother with sysv in it. Learn systemd properly, and then you know how to administer Linux properly. Learn about several different package managers, but most importantly, you should learn debugging skills. And this is why you need to have a home lab. You need to install unfamiliar tools, things that you don't know about, and then things are going to break. And then you're going to learn about finding and reading logs. You can grab through them efficiently. You know where to find them. You know where to go on the file system. And training yourself in the debugging skills is super important. Next, networking fundamentals is crucial. Like, know about CIDR ranges and subnetting, but also like what is a network interface and how do I configure them on Linux? Am I using Network Manager or systemd, networkd, etc.? So very important to know these fundamentals. And finally, bash scripting. I don't care what you say. If you don't know bash scripting, then you are definitely falling behind as a DevOps engineer. And yes, there are Windows environments. There are places where they exclusively run Windows and PowerShell. And in those places, okay, you might not have to know Linux, but when you're going to get into containers and Kubernetes, then all of that is Linux, guys. And if you know Linux well, you're going to have such an advantage just in your own learning and in your own experience of working. It's going to be so much less friction. So the benchmark of Linux, of learning Linux, is I recommend to learn Linux to the point where you can install Arch Linux and know exactly what you are doing. There are these videos where they fire off the Arch installation guide in 20 minutes, but those guys don't actually have a clue what they're doing. They're not even encrypting their file system. And fair enough, it's a good YouTube video, but this is not the way to do it. So I created a 6-hour playlist on YouTube, which goes super deep into building the Arch Linux system that you're actually seeing here. I'm recording this on Arch Linux, by the way. And this guide will teach you deeply how to install Arch Linux, and this is basically the level that I would expect a DevOps candidate to know. There are a couple of certifications that I recommend looking at. The RHCSA, Red Hat Certified System Administrator, or the LPIC 1. Advantage of the LPIC 1 is that it's agnostic. The RHCSA obviously is Red Hat focused, but it's still a great exam to do. But LPIC 1 is maybe a bit broader. So these are certifications that you might want to look at. I have the LPIC 1 myself. And if you want to know more, make sure to jump into my private DevOps community. In the classroom, there is a full course on Linux and a full list of great resources to learn Linux, going from absolute beginners to higher up, and then my full Arch Linux course, which contains modules that are not available on YouTube. It's available at school.com/KubeCraft. So moving on from Linux to the next section, which is containers. And I'm presenting this in order. This is roughly the way that I think you should learn in order. So going from starting your home lab to Linux to containers, I need you to learn about Docker files, and container security. Know what these are, know what it means to run a container, what's the difference from installing a binary and running a container on your system. Then you're going to move into running multiple containers using Docker Compose and learn about Docker networking. And dev containers are also very important to know about these days, I believe. I think it's the future of software development environments. And basically, dev containers, you can find them at containers.dev. It's a standard released by Microsoft, and you can specify in JSON files what you want to have in your containers. And then basically, you're creating a full development environment with everything you need for the specific project. And a developer can come in, spin up the dev container, and have all the tools that they need for that project readily available. And this is DevOps to the max, in my opinion. So learn about dev containers and start using them in your workflows. So in terms of resources, it's actually quite simple. Just read the Docker docs and start playing with the containers. There's plenty of free materials available on YouTube. I really recommend this course. It's like 4 hours long. It's completely for free. And I think this guy did a really good job about it. But you don't, like containers is actually fairly simple. It's not rocket science. But the most important thing is to start running containers in your home lab. So begin with your normal home lab, installing Linux binaries, etc. Maybe run Postgres database. And then after that, try running that Postgres database in a container, for example. Learn about how these volumes work and how you can mount your Postgres database data into a different container, for example. These things are really interesting to play with. And again, you'll only need a 2 GB RAM laptop for this. But start with installing binaries and then move on to running everything in containers in your home lab. And that's a very good progression. Moving from containers to programming, which is the next step in the DevOps roadmap that I created. Any DevOps engineer should at least know the fundamentals of at least one programming language, in my opinion. You don't need to go deep. You don't need to learn the deep algorithms and grind lead code, in my opinion. It's not the point to become a software engineer, but it's mainly for connecting tools and APIs together. And in order to do that properly, I suggest that you learn the fundamentals of some of the languages that I'm going to show you afterwards. But learn about variables, learn functions, learn what object-oriented programming means, and learn how to work with libraries. If you know these things, then you're going to get pretty far as a DevOps engineer. And before we go into the recommended languages, I just want to touch upon knowing Git. So if you're going to work with infrastructure as code, you need to be able to work with Git as well. So definitely learn Git in this process. And you don't have to be a master. You don't have to do all of this complex rebasing stuff. All you need to, in my opinion, you need to know is to create pull requests and know what commit messages are, how to write a proper commit message, and how to collaborate with people using Git, using feature branches, etc. Next, I put this under programming, but YAML isn't really a programming language. But I like to say that learn to love YAML and you will never be without a job. YAML is used for Ansible, so provisioning Linux, configuring Linux from a distance using Ansible is all done through YAML. Kubernetes is all YAML. The Kubernetes API works with YAML objects. Fundamentally, it's JSON, of course, but you use YAML to interact with it. GitHub Actions are written in YAML. Azure DevOps Pipelines, it's all YAML. So YAML is basically the lingua franca of the cloud-native world, in my opinion. So it's used everywhere. So you learn to do it well. Learn how objects work in YAML and learn what a list is in YAML, how that's notated, and make sure you get your hours of wrestling in with YAML files. Like in the beginning, it's really tough with the indentation. I struggled quite a bit in the beginning, but when you know it, and you need to be able to just look at a YAML file and see, oh wait, that's off, that's not right. And then your life is just going to be so much easier when you're going to go into Kubernetes and getting those certifications later, which is going to be one of the next sections in the roadmap. And also bash scripting. I put this under programming. It's not necessarily programming, but again, bash scripting comes back here. You can do so much with just bash scripting, and lots of the CI/CD pipeline tooling can basically be replaced by just simple bash scripts. And that's actually a good practice. Instead of having code in your CI/CD pipelines directly, you should rather have them in separate scripts that you can test and develop individually instead of just having it in the pipeline itself. So bash scripting is also part of this category, in my opinion. So let's look into the recommended languages. There are basically two languages that I recommend you look into. It's Python, Go, but don't even think about Rust. I was a bit excited about Rust when I first heard about it, but it's so much more complex than you need as a beginner DevOps engineer. This is more for software engineering. Don't listen to those trends and just think that you have to learn Rust just because a lot of YouTube videos are being made about it. It's a great language, but you don't need it as a beginner DevOps engineer. What you should learn, in my opinion, is Python. So let's talk about Python versus Go. Python is incredibly versatile, so it's used in so many areas, like AI and MLOps, which we'll get into later. But you can just do so much with it. Basically, everything can be done with Python. It might not be the fastest or the most beautiful, but you can get shit done. And that's why I really recommend to learn that. It's really friendly for beginners. It's easy to learn. It has tons of free resources available. And again, it has lots of use cases. So highly recommend to learn Python as your first language. Also because it's the most popular language in AI and MLOps. And I'm going to get into that later, why you should focus on AI as a DevOps engineer. But that whole world basically speaks Python. And if you know this, then you can just slide in there really easily. Go is also super popular, obviously, and it's a great language. I've learned the fundamentals of it. It does feel more like, what do you call it? More elaborate, more like software engineering instead of just writing code, because you're working with pointers and memory, and it is definitely feels more mature in that sense. But therefore it's also harder to learn, and it's very popular in the States, but it's much less popular here in the EU. So when I did research for myself, I found like significantly more jobs that mention Python than Go. Basically, there are very few jobs available for Go here in the Netherlands, at least. And especially for DevOps cloud native roles, they rarely mention Go, at least in my experience from what I have researched in my local market. And you have to decide how it is for your local market. But if you're like interested in transitioning towards software engineering in the future, if you're more interested in like actually creating applications or writing Kubernetes operators and things like that, then Go is obviously the way to go. And so you can't go wrong with any of these. But as a big first language, I would still recommend just learning Python, because if you know Python, Go is going to be a lot easier to pick up as well. In terms of learning Python, there are a few recommended resources. There is Exercism. Exercism is a free website that has these learning tracks for 65 plus languages, one of them being Python. So if you look at Python and then go to learn, then here you see they have this whole learning path that you can just work through completely for free. And what I like with Exercism is that you can actually do these exercises on the CLI in your local environment. That's really cool. There's also Free Code Camp. Free Code Camp. I actually haven't looked at it, but I would be very surprised if they didn't have a Python code module. So check that out as well. You can if you go through these, then you know the fundamentals. There's also a course called 100 Days of Code on Udemy by, I think her name is Dr. Angela Yu. It's a very good course. I took that one and I learned a lot from that one. And in terms of learning Go, I recommend starting with the Tour of Go. The Go programming language. And if you want to learn more about Go, you should definitely check out RWX Rob on YouTube. He has tons of videos about Go, why you should learn it, how you should learn it. So check him out if you want to learn about Go. And in terms of learning programming, like what I recommend going through one of those fundamentals courses, know the concepts, but then as soon as possible, start automating things. Start automating small things for yourself. Sending things to ChatGPT, for example. Try to think of small little projects. And they don't have to be useful. They don't have to actually do anything. It can just be a fun thing to do. And one thing that is very useful for this is this website called Free Public APIs. And these are APIs that give you an endpoint to talk to. So there's a Harry Potter API. So providing data on Harry Potter characters and spells, or air quality API. So you can write a little thing that if you run a command in your terminal, that will curl this endpoint and show you Harry Potter stats or something. Those kinds of silly little things are fun to build, but it doesn't have to be useful, but it will teach you a lot about how to create projects and how to code and how to solve problems for yourself. And there's also automate the boring stuff. It's a bit dated at this point, but it's still a very interesting resource to go through. It's also free to read, but you should support him by buying the book. It's a great book. But this is also a great resource that I recommend as well. So learn programming, learn a programming language. You don't have to become a software engineer. You don't have to become a professional programmer, but you should be able to stitch a few things together. You should be able to automate small things and bake them in a container image and run that on a Kubernetes cluster or something like that. You need to know about that whole workflow. And it will also help you to think more as a developer and how to help the developers as much as possible. So moving on from programming to cloud, that's the next part in the roadmap. And beginning with cloud, I have one piece of advice for you, which is to learn one cloud provider and to learn that well. I did a full video on it. It's called Choosing the Right Cloud for You. And I basically go very deep into that question of why you should learn one cloud provider. And I also teach you how to figure out which cloud provider to choose. So definitely check out that video because it will help you to answer that question for you. And basically it comes down to doing the market research. And that is how I ended up with Azure. I started researching jobs and for AWS and Azure in my local market. And I found that there were like maybe 50 jobs for AWS and there were hundreds of jobs for mentioning Azure. So to me, it was very clear that Azure was the right choice for me to go in terms of employability and job availability. And one of the reasons for that is that Microsoft has data centers right here in the Netherlands. So Microsoft Azure is naturally much more popular with like enterprise and government because they sometimes have requirements that they need to keep the data in the country. So that is one reason why Azure is really popular here in the Netherlands. And you should figure out if that's the case for you as well. Another thing that I like about Azure is that it has a lot of free learning resources available for you. There is Microsoft Learn. It's just the full Microsoft documentation, which is sometimes a bit repetitive, but it does give you everything you need to know in order to get certified. And then there is the great John Saville. This man is a hero. He has this huge YouTube channel with tutorials on everything and every certification. And he's not even running ads on it. It's amazing. So those two are the only resources that you need. And I did this tweet about it as well, and that did really well. It got 1,500 likes and almost 100,000 views, where I basically say Microsoft Learn and John Saville's YouTube is a complete cloud education without spending a dime. And this really resonated with the people on X, and for a reason, because it's good advice. Like I make my living. One of the ways I make my living is selling courses. I would love to sell you Azure courses, but I don't think it's necessary for me to make Azure courses because it's already all out there for free. So that's one good reason to learn Azure, because all of the materials are available for free there. Next is AWS, Amazon Web Services. And well, I am a Microsoft MVP and I am specialized on Microsoft Azure. So I can't really speak to what the good resources are for AWS, but I do have a community of expert DevOps engineers, almost 400, that I can consult with. So I went to my private DevOps community, KubeCraft, and I asked the question, as I only know the Azure world, I thought I'd start a thread about AWS. What are the good YouTube channels to focus on? Which certifications are the best ones to get, and in what order? And what courses do you recommend? Well, I posted that a week ago. It got lots of likes and engagement. And as you see here, all the expert engineers that we have here started pouring out all their knowledge, and they are sharing freely what they know about it. And what came out here was the following. Adrian Cantrill. I don't know the man, I don't know his courses, no affiliation, but everyone in the thread was basically recommending his stuff. So check out Adrian Cantrill if you want to learn AWS. Another thing that was mentioned was CodeCloud. Everybody knows CodeCloud, but they apparently have good courses on AWS as well. And finally, one of the engineers actually recommended the AWS Skill Builder. And this actually looks really good. It's a subscription service, and this gives you lab experiences and exam preparation. So this looks like a really useful resource if you want to learn AWS. But maybe this also shows you how powerful it is to actually be in a community of passionate people that are all about DevOps engineers, where you can ask questions like this, and people, this is actually so great that people are just sharing all of their stuff freely in the community. So if you want to become a serious DevOps engineer, go to school.com/KubeCraft and jump in, because you're basically doing yourself a disservice not being here, because there's so much golden knowledge being shared here every day, and you can ask questions like this and actually get answers. So that's Azure, AWS. Then we have Google Cloud. So Google Cloud is interesting because it looks really good. I played around with it a little bit. They have really good documentation, but unfortunately in terms of jobs and market share, they are a lot smaller. So I am personally not betting on GCP in terms of my own career. AWS and Azure are definitely the big players in my market. So I basically choose where the money is. But I do see, I'm very active on X, and I'm following the AI and machine learning space a lot there. And I do see that Google Cloud is very popular there as well. So that's an interesting observation. And in terms of learning, they have also great free resources. I haven't done them myself, so I can't speak to how good it is, but it's probably really good. They have certifications and free resources. So you can go to this link and then learn from there. And then the next piece of cloud is going to be infrastructure as code. So this is really important to learn as a DevOps cloud engineer. The first one being Bicep, if you have chosen Azure. Bicep is a domain-specific language for Microsoft Azure only. But if you're working with Azure, you basically have to learn Bicep. And I found it to be very intuitive, very easy to learn. And again, great free resources available for it. There is a full course, Fundamentals of Bicep, Intermediate Bicep, and Advanced Bicep. And if you work through those, you can work with Bicep easily. And I prefer it. I much prefer it over Terraform. It's a much cleaner and basically more intuitive way of working, in my opinion. This is my feeling about it. But then the next one is going to be Terraform. Every DevOps engineer needs to know Terraform, and it's used a lot in AWS circles, obviously. But the interesting thing about Terraform is that it also has providers for different things. So Proxmox is something that you might use in your home lab, which you can use to provision virtual machines. Well, Proxmox has a Terraform provider. So you can set up your home lab and learn Terraform in your home lab by provisioning infrastructure on your own Proxmox server. And you can document that on your blog, for example. So Terraform is good to learn. I have yet to see a smooth implementation of it. There's always problems with state files and drift. And well, I'm not going to go into that. There is a full video on infrastructure as code on my YouTube channel as well. But in terms of learning Terraform, there is a learning path for the Terraform Associate certification, which I recommend. So you just go through all of this material, do the certification, and then you know Terraform, and then you have a good understanding of infrastructure as code. Lastly, there is Pulumi. Pulumi is basically infrastructure as code using languages like Python or Go. It's basically an SDK for that. And they have tutorials here. Get started with Microsoft Azure, for example. You have the Infra as Code SDK, and then you just write Python and you can provision infrastructure. So that is, I haven't seen that implemented a lot in the wild, but it might be an interesting one to check out. Next, there are a few cloud elements or cloud areas of focus that I would recommend. So there are databases. Databases is an extremely useful skill to know about. I always end up being the database guy in the team. I have I usually do the backups of databases, restoring them, dumping them. I've skills in running databases on Kubernetes in production, and I have moved them from Kubernetes to the cloud and the other way around. It's a really good skill to have. And in terms of databases, I recommend learning Postgres. If you learn Postgres, then all of the other ones are going to be fairly intuitive as well. So definitely learn databases. Storage and backup is very important to know. That is, any good environment always has good backup solutions. And it's good to know all of the terminology around it and best practices. Again, networking. You don't have to go super deep in cloud networking, actually. You can get away with just knowing CIDR ranges, subnetting, and then a lot of this is being handled by the cloud itself. So as long as you are not overlapping IP ranges, then you are actually, it's actually pretty foolproof. But the one resource I recommend is to do the AZ-104 certification for Azure. And that one has a networking module, which is really deep. Like most of that certification is about networking. And I learned most of my cloud networking from that course. And it is completely for free. And even if you're not learning Azure, I think it will really help you learning networking. Next, there is IAM. For Azure, that's Entra ID. Before it was Azure AD. And it's basically a cloud role-based access control. And this is a huge part of any cloud environment. And it's really important to know about role assignments, how this works, groups, all of that. So definitely an important skill to focus on in terms of the cloud. And one thing that I should add here as well is CI/CD. So I was wondering where to put it. It's basically its own sections, but I'm just going to put it under cloud now. In terms of CI/CD, I don't recommend learning Jenkins, only if you know that the company you want to work for uses Jenkins. Then you of course need to do it. But I wouldn't recommend learning Jenkins just for Jenkins' sake. Basically, the two standards are GitHub Actions and GitLab CI. Those are the two ones to focus on. And maybe Azure DevOps Pipelines, if you know that the organization you're going to work for uses that. Let's take a look at cloud certifications. I recommend them, even though in the Home Lab section, I mentioned that Practical application wins over certification any day, confirmed by CTOs and hiring managers. You still need to get your certifications in order to verify that you know. So the point is that you should not just only have certifications. You need to supplement that with practical learning. But especially if you're a career changer, then certifications are your ticket in, basically. So I recommend them. They provide you a goal to work towards and a structure to follow. That's the best thing about certifications. It's absolutely required for junior roles. Like, you need some way of proving that you understand this stuff, and a certification is a good way to do it. It looks good on the CV, but do not neglect practical application. Put things into practice. Don't just do the certifications. Get a free subscription for Azure, for example. If you do Azure free trial, you can get like 200 here, Azure free account. You can try it for free. You can get like a few $100s of credit, $200 of credit for a month. You can use that to learn your certifications and just put it into practice. And finally, I also have a free certification path in my free community, school.com/Misha. If you open that and you join completely for free, you go to the classroom, and then here in cloud, there is a full section on cloud, on which cloud you should choose, and more about certification paths, etc. So make sure to jump in there. And also the entire roadmap that you see here that I created is going to be available for download in that free community at school.com/Misha. So let's move on to the next section, which is, of course, going to be Kubernetes. Kubernetes, the love of my life. Why do you need to learn Kubernetes? What is it, and why should you know it? Kubernetes is a container orchestrator, so I recommend that you start learning Docker and running multiple containers. Well, at some point, you're going to realize that in enterprise production, Docker Compose is not going to cut it. And I wrote then next, why you should learn Kubernetes is basically summarized here in this tweet. It dominates container orchestration across all major cloud platforms. Azure runs a lot on, Azure itself runs a lot on Kubernetes, for example. It has built-in features to automate modern application deployment and management. So it's basically becoming the de facto standard of cloud-native development. High-paying DevOps jobs require strong Kubernetes expertise. If you only know Linux and you're lagging behind, you don't know Kubernetes, you're not going to get that 300K job. Automated scaling and deployment strategies reduce manual operations. So automation is the name of the game for DevOps, and Kubernetes, the cloud-native ecosystem running on Kubernetes definitely dominates this game, in my opinion. The integration with emerging tech makes Kubernetes future-proof. Like, Google runs everything on Kubernetes. Microsoft is running Azure on Kubernetes. This is a sign. Next, the AI workloads run on Kubernetes. ChatGPT runs on Kubernetes. AI is growing, and therefore Kubernetes is growing. Always focus on growing markets. And like, again, this one got a bit less, but it's about 7,000 views and 200 likes almost. So again, this resonates, right? And you should know that Kubernetes AI, the AI space, the AI models are running on Kubernetes. The training happens on Kubernetes. And this is only going to grow. It's only going to grow in the next 10 years. It's not going to stop anytime soon. And you can either be there and have the skills, or you can get left behind. You should not start with Kubernetes until you know the Linux fundamentals and you know containers and Docker. I've heard of people just going straight into Kubernetes, getting really confused and fed up, and it just doesn't work. When you have done Linux and Docker in your home lab, you know how to run containers. Then it's time to start moving to Kubernetes as a home lab. The Kubernetes home lab is the prime example of home tinkering, self-hosting, and learning your job at the same time, making your job into your hobby and your hobby into your job. And a Kubernetes home lab is the perfect vehicle for that. And the best thing about it is that you can use GitOps, and you should use that as early as possible, because that means you can make your home lab public. And what do I mean by that is I have my home lab repo here. It has 55 stars on GitHub. I have almost 1,000 commits in that project. And anyone can go in here and see how I approach a software project. They can see how I structure things, how I like to separate things, and they can see the code that I write. They can see how I run my databases. They can see everything. But they also see that I'm clever and I'm not committing any secrets to my home lab. Anyone can see all of the documentation and get a sense of how I think like an engineer. This is the perfect visitor card on the internet. This is like the most powerful thing that you can have. Apart from a LinkedIn profile, any hiring manager or CTO that is looking someone up and he sees this, he will know he has a candidate that he can at least have a good technical conversation with, because this candidate knows how to articulate himself, how to justify his choices, and he is comfortable with running public infrastructure. So this is the way to do it. And Kubernetes is a great way of making that public. So how you should learn Kubernetes? Well, my whole community is specialized on this. This is why I created the KubeCraft community, because there's just so much conflicting information out there. And I'm going to recommend a few certifications, and those have great courses on Udemy. But what these courses don't teach you is how to actually manage Kubernetes clusters. They will teach you all of the theory. They will teach you everything, how to set it up, but they don't teach you how to work with these clusters from the CLI. They don't actually go deep into the practical application of things. And that's why I created my Kubernetes fundamentals course. So make sure you jump into my KubeCraft community. And if you go then here to my Kubernetes fundamentals course, it's 8 hours long, and it goes really deep into what Kubernetes is, how to actually, it's just a 1 hour course on pods alone, right? How to actually build an application and how you can expose that, how you can approach that from the browser. And all of that is done in a deep level on a practical way. So it's as if you were sitting together and everything is CLI based. And that is so important because these certifications, the Certified Kubernetes Application Developer, Certified Kubernetes Administrator, and the Certified Kubernetes Security Expert, these are all timed exams where you log into a server environment and they give you a set of problems, tell you to solve it, and best of luck. That's it. So you have 2 hours to do a lot of complex operations, and you need to have the terminal skills to do that. You need to know how to navigate the terminal easily, how to work with kubectl. And this is what is not taught in these courses that I'm going to recommend afterwards. It's just the theory, but they don't tell you how to actually get an example of an ingress resource from kubectl within 1 second and being able to grab from there what you need. And that's why I created this course. It goes super deep into this stuff. And as you see here, it's getting super good reviews. And he says here, the best Kubernetes course I've taken so far, despite having already 2 or 3 famous teachers. This one slowly explains the basics from a practical standpoint, and you can see the experience emerge in every lesson. School.com/KubeCraft and take my Kubernetes fundamentals course. You will not regret it. And in terms of, after you've done that one, then you have a fair basic understanding of Kubernetes, and then you should look into the Code Cloud courses. So these are available on Udemy for like $20 a piece. Just wait for them until they are sale. But Moonshot, Mama and Beth's courses are basically the ones to take. And the CKS one is actually completely for free on YouTube by Kim Woestkamp. Let me see. CKS Kim. Here we go. This is it. 172K 127K views, 11-hour course available for free. Oh, that's funny. My video is also here. So this video also shows you basically everything you need to do in order to get your Kubernetes CKS certification. So those are the certifications to get. And with that, there is the Kubestronaut achievement that you can shoot for. So this is basically a way for the CNCF to make more money, which is fine. But they have released a couple of more certifications. They have the KCNA and KCSA, which are more basic multiple choice. And then the 3 certifications I just showed you. But then you get the Kubestronaut award and you get to network with a lot of people, which is great. So that is a nice one to shoot for. And in my KubeCraft community, we actually have several Kubestronauts. I think we're about 6 now. But we have Luis Copa, we have Jose, we have Sander Snekes, and we have Rohan here. Rohan joined our community. He didn't know anything about Kubernetes when he joined. I taught him everything I knew, and he is actually now a Kubestronaut. So yeah, the stuff that I teach in my community actually works, and people are getting these certifications left, right, and center. So the great thing about my community is that these people actually have the certifications, and they will share the tips and tricks with you if you want to know more. So make sure to jump into KubeCraft. Finally, there's also the Kubernetes Home Lab course, because that's basically the next level, where I told you that you should have a public home lab, and the Kubernetes Home Lab is basically the perfect one to do. And I also have a full course on how to set up your Kubernetes Home Lab from scratch. It will save you hundreds of hours, so check that out if you're interested. Kubernetes is important to learn as a DevOps engineer, and now we have covered so much tech, home lab, Linux, containers, programming, cloud, and Kubernetes. But arguably, what's even more important than that are the soft skills. So the soft skills are very important in the terms of communication and networking. Being a DevOps engineer, even though you might want to become it because you think you're going to code all day and you think you can have your focus time, it's actually very different. DevOps is all about bringing teams together and optimizing workflows, talking to developers, talking to managers, burning down these bridges, burning down the silos. And in order to do that properly, you need to have good communication skills. If you just want to code, then this is probably not the right job for you. And there are a few ways how I recommend you get better at your communication. You can join a community and ask for help when you get stuck. Then instantly you are getting interaction with other engineers, so you can basically practice that skill and putting yourself out there. Asking for help is a really important skill to learn. And you need to start building a network. Kevin Samuel says that your network is your net worth. And that's true. It's so true. You need to start building a network of engineers, especially if you are in the beginning of your career. And one good way to do that is to attend meetups. There are always some sort of DevOps-related, cloud-related meetups in any area. If you want to find them, you go to meetup.com, and here you can find meetups about anything, but definitely go and attend meetups and network with people, because very often there will be recruiters there as well. Surround yourself with other students. Surround yourself with people that are on the same path as you and you can share experience with. And I have my free community for that. It has like 3,000 members. You can join for free. You can meet other people here who are doing the same. And this whole roadmap is available for free there as well. And that's one place to start where you can make friends. Next, you have to start practicing your presentation skills, public speaking. This is also very important. Like, I was really, in places, I'm always very excited about Kubernetes, but you actually have to convince people that this is the way to go, right? Sometimes you have to be able to give demos and see, well, we are currently taking 30 minutes to deploy something to production. Look how it goes with this solution. And then you have to sit there with your camera on and speak and operate the computer at the same time. This is a skill that you need to learn, that you need to practice. And one way to do that is actually to start recording yourself while you're doing your work or your studies. You don't have to publish it, you don't have to become a YouTuber, but this is a really great way to learn how to speak while you operate the computer and while you explain things like I'm doing now. I couldn't do this when I started out, and I have learned this over time. So definitely something to practice. You have to create the skill or polish the skill of building teams and bringing people together. Like, be the glue, be the person who is always saying good morning in the group chat, and being the one who brings people together and who is not afraid to address problems in meetings. And this is really important in your skill set as a DevOps engineer. Secondly, there is the personal brand. So I'm really big on this. Well, you know me because I'm active on LinkedIn and YouTube and X, etc. But basically, I never have to apply for jobs at all. I never apply for jobs. Any job that I'm getting these days is people coming to me, asking me whether I'm interested to work with them. And that happens because I put myself out there, because I have a track record, I have a reputation, and people basically know what they are going to get when they hire me. And this is why I can be a freelancer without using any recruiters, because I have done the work of building a personal brand. And when I started out, the best thing that I did when I started out was to start a blog and document my journey on that blog. Because when I was applying for my first jobs, people looked me up, they saw my blog, and they saw, oh, this guy is better than the other guys because he's actually writing about what he wants to do. Like, they get the sense that I was truly passionate about what I was doing because I was willing to write about it in my free time. And I was not a part of the stack of CVs. No, I was the guy with the blog who they found on LinkedIn. And that's a very different mindset to be in when you're talking to someone. So do this. Start a blog, share your journey, show your work, and create a lab repo, like I showed you, the home lab repo. Start building up a good GitHub account and personal page, like I showed you. It's arguably one of the most important pages you have. Start posting on X every day. It's not about getting followers, but it's about someone looking you up, and then, like me, if you go to my profile, you just see an endless stream about where I'm talking about Azure, Kubernetes, everything that I'm doing. I'm just putting that out there, and someone's going to see, okay, this guy is passionate about what he does. It's not about followers, it's about leaving a trail for people to look at. And I highly recommend posting on LinkedIn twice a week. Lastly, there is, in the soft skills section, there is finding a job and interviewing. So interviewing and job application is a skill in and of itself that needs to be practiced. So even if you're already in a job, it's actually a good practice to, if people approach you and they ask you if you're interested in working with them, to have an interview, to have the interview with them. Like, you shouldn't waste people's time, but it is a skill to be honed and to be practiced. So you shouldn't expect that you're going to land the first job on your first interview, because you need to get in the reps. You need to do 100 interviews to actually learn how to present yourself properly, to get your story straight. So do it. Take a lot of interviews and practice, because landing the first position is really important. So if, like, when you have no experience and you maybe come from a different career like I did, then you need to get that first position. You need to get the first actual production experience on your CV. And for that, you need to be willing to accept low pay. Be willing to accept 30% less than all of the other candidates, because in the end, it's all about money. If they're hiring for a junior position and then they have junior engineers and one of them is willing to go even lower because he's just so passionate about what he wants to do, then do it. Like, I was making around minimum wage in my first DevOps position, but I was doing the same work as senior engineers who had been there for 20 years. hey, I was happy. I was getting my first experience, and when I ended that gig and I looked for my next one, I basically doubled my salary because I had the experience. So be willing to make amends and to accept low pay. Next, you should use everything you've done in your free time. So if you're not in this for the money, if you're in this like me because you're passionate about what you do, which you should be, you are also coding in your free time. You are doing projects in your free time. You're building a home lab in your free time. And all of that you should use to the max in job interviews and on your CV. And in my case, I was automating video games. I was writing scripts for online RPGs and running those on servers. And I could speak about that excitingly. And this is why I got hired, because I had that experience. So you do everything that you do in your free time, use that to the max. And like I said, you should practice interviews, cultivate a good CV, and tailor every CV to the position. Don't be lazy. Don't just mass apply with the same CV and cover letter everywhere. No, actually tailor it to the application and show that you have put in some work in it if you are in the position of having to apply. But if you build a strong personal brand and you have some experience, the jobs will start coming to you. So the last part of the roadmap is artificial intelligence. So I know, everything is all about AI these days, but in terms of DevOps careers, this is not one to sleep on, guys. Definitely not. Because this is where the money is and where the money is going to be for the next 10 years. So there are a few elements of the AI section here. So let's just start with AI in and of itself. If you are a DevOps engineer who has an above average understanding of AI, you are going to stand out. If you know more about AI than your competition, then you have a huge advantage, because AI is where it's happening currently and where it's going to be happening. So you can stand out if you have AI knowledge. And I recommend that you learn about the processes that are involved with creating these models. Like, what does it mean to train an LLM? How is that going? How does that work? And if you know this, if you have an understanding of this, then you're going to have a huge advantage. So you need to have a basic understanding of AI, with large language models. What is it? What does it do? And like some people, for example, like memory, like some people think that when they chat with Claude or ChatGPT, that the model is like learning as they go, that the model is improving with every chat that they make. It's not true. A model is trained once and then it's released, and then you give it input and it produces output, but that's it. Nothing else is happening. ChatGPT now has a memory function, so it does have some sort of memory. It's just being added to the prompt every time. But you need to have this basic understanding if you want to be a future-proof DevOps engineer. And in terms of learning AI, well, I watched this 5-hour podcast, on the Lex Fridman podcast with the CEO of Anthropic, the creators of the Claude large language model, Claude Sonnet. And in that podcast, the CEO of Anthropic, he actually gives very interesting advice, which is, if you want to learn about AI, if you want to get into that world, just play with the models. Just interact with them. Just use them in your daily life and play around with them. And this was actually quite eye-opening, because I had been doing that a lot, but in order to get a good understanding of it, you actually need to use it. And that is very, very solid advice. So 1 year ago, I was just only asking AI coding questions. Now I'm spending like 1 or 2 hours a day chatting with ChatGPT and Claude, because it's helping me with so many things in my life. And you can only arrive at this level if you're actually willing to play and put some time into learning the models. Next, what I recommend is X. So I've always neglected X, but currently I'm actually having a lot of fun on X, and it seems that the AI space, the AI machine learning space, as you see in my feed, like this is AI, this is AI, this is AI, Anthropic, it's all AI. So if you follow the right accounts, then all of the hot news, all of the happening things are being posted to X. And there seems to be a very active AI startup scene on X, which I recommend you start following. So there's this podcast that I recommend, but also the book Artificial Intelligence, A Guide for Thinking Humans. This was recommended to me by my friend Zen, and he is an AI engineer who works at GitHub, and he recommended this resource to me. And I've almost finished the book, and I can highly recommend it to anyone who wants to learn more about artificial intelligence and machine learning, because this book will teach you what it's all about. So highly recommend that one. The next section of the artificial intelligence tree I've created here is AI infrastructure engineering. So this is basically where the money is going to be in the next 10 years. And this is where DevOps engineers can be, this is where you can shine as a DevOps engineer. So in the research for this video, I came across this article by Min.io, and it's titled AI ML's sous chef, why your second hire should be a DevOps engineer. So it's about when you create an AI startup, the first hire should be a data engineer, but then the second hire should be a DevOps engineer. And that's telling you something, right? Like data engineers and DevOps engineers are crucial in this AI ML space, because the data engineer, he wants to be focusing on building and fine-tuning models without needing to be bogged down with things like infrastructure as code or monitoring or development environments. So the DevOps engineer handles monitoring, he handles scaling, disaster recovery, CI/CD pipelines, development environments. Like the data engineer might not care, but a DevOps engineer knows that you need a separate staging environment and production environment, and you are the one who is going to be creating that. So this is the new meta, I think. DevOps engineers have a great chance of shining in this space, and this is why I highly recommend that you look into AI, focus on it, and learn skills related to it, because this is basically going to future-proof your career. And it's fun. It's super interesting. So I am on this path myself. I'm basically at the point where I've mastered Kubernetes to a degree that I can do what I want to do. Same for cloud. I can do what I need to do. I can learn what I need to learn. And now it's time for me to move on to AI. And this is basically the roadmap that I am pursuing myself. So step one for me is to master GPU on Kubernetes. Like how do I pass through GPUs? How do I use GPUs in my containers? How do I make GPUs available to workloads on Kubernetes? And for that, I'm going to be digging into the NVIDIA GPU operator. I'm going to be learning about distributed AI computing. So everything AI related is happening on Kubernetes because it scales so well. And you can have cluster computing. So you can have your training rounds where you use a lot of compute for training the models, but then there's a second part where it's running the models, and this can scale up and down. You can divide the capacity. Run AI comes into mind with this. So learning how this works is going to be a very interesting and useful skill set to have. Machine learning data storage, like how do you handle machine learning data? How is that stored? How is it being accessed by the Kubernetes cluster and the workloads? How to monitor GPU performance, monitoring like machine learning process performance, etc., and deploying machine learning platforms. So these are the areas of focus that I'm currently focusing on. And tools that I'm looking into are Kubeflow and Kaito. The Kaito operator is the Kubernetes AI toolchain operator. It's created by Microsoft and it's integrated into AKS. So that is going to be an interesting one. And there's also Min.io AI store. And this is basically where the machine learning data is going to be stored in S3 compatible objects. And that's also one to look into. And again, check out this article, why your second hire should be a DevOps engineer, and you'll get an understanding of why it's important to learn AI as a DevOps engineer. So the next part of the AI tree here is MLOps. So MLOps brings DevOps principles to machine learning. MLOps is concerned with the entire life cycle of machine learning and models. So it has a broader scope. And if you check out this resource here, so this is an excellent article where it says that machine learning operations, MLOps, are a set of practices that automate and simplify machine learning workflows and deployments. So as you see here, the ML lifecycle, the machine learning lifecycle, so the cycle of training a model is fairly huge. There's this whole data prep, and this is usually the data engineer's area of expertise, of course. But then there's the training and the tuning and the deploying and monitoring. So this is definitely an area where you can shine as a DevOps engineer if you already have the experience. So it's a broader scope. So you will have to learn about data as well. But I think MLOps is a great career growth opportunity. So like maybe you are already a DevOps engineer, and then you might be wondering, well, what's after DevOps? And I think MLOps is a great growth opportunity for DevOps engineers. So in my KubeCraft community, I'm also going to be doing a community project where we're going to be creating our own Kubernetes cluster and training our own models. And then we're going to be learning more about MLOps. And this is why I think it's very important that you focus on artificial intelligence as a DevOps engineer.